This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 65 of Here's How. There's intense debate with and among feminists about whether Western feminists have their priorities right or are attacking people who should be allies. The piece Cop on Comrades blew up Twitter with controversy recently. In this podcast, I'm talking to one of its signatories.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
I wouldn't normally do a podcast about a blog post, but this is a blog post that has been signed by almost 500 people, so it's not an ordinary blog post. It's also a blog post with a bit of a backstory, so let me tell you what that is first. You might have heard about Dean Scurry. He's one of the activists who organised Home Sweet Home, the occupation of Apollo House by the homeless. Dean also set up a podcast last year where he talks to various people, and the title of the podcast is Pow Wow with Dean Scurry. Pow Wow, if you remember your John Wayne films, is a term associated with North American Indians. It's got two main definitions in the dictionary, and they are a North American Indian ceremony involving feasting and dancing, and the second one, a conference or meeting for discussion, especially among friends or colleagues. Dean got some criticism on Twitter from a user called Adele McAleer, who said that he should know that the name you chose belongs to First Nations culture and is not appropriate. Dean and others disagreed, and Adele went on to tweet, "It would be offensive to use the term except in the case of an actual powwow which has a specific cultural and spiritual reference." One of the people who tweeted on that thread was the novelist Frankie Gaffney, who, a few weeks later, wrote a piece for the Irish Times under the title "Identity Politics is Utterly Ineffective at Anything Other than Dividing People." In it, he said that, in effect, disputes like these are pointless, that they consume energy that could go into more worthwhile campaigns, and that they are based on the false premise categorizing people as privileged for narrow reasons and imposing rules on them on that basis. The article was shared widely online, and it provoked a response that included a post on the blog called Feminist Ire, which was critical not so much of the article, but of the men who shared and commented on the article. The blog post has been signed by more than 480 women who identify themselves as Irish feminists. Feminist Ire has the tagline "Not Your Fluffy Feminism," and one of the first signatories was Sinead Redmond, whose Twitter description includes a mention that she is an angry feminist who enjoys ruining feminism for everyone. I got Sinead on the line, and I asked her first to take up the story from there and tell me what it was that she wanted to say in the blog post.
Yeah, so I think there's about 480 signatories at the moment.
Wow.
It's really got a lot of traction. So really captured, I think, the feelings of a lot of women who are involved in activism on the left. And I really want to clarify, because for everyone listening, it wasn't me who was writing it at all.
You didn't draft it, but you signed it, and I guess you endorse its feelings.
Oh, completely. Very strongly. So I guess for us it wasn't a response piece to the article in the Times. It was a response piece to the amount of men we consider comrades we saw sharing it and commenting in ways that we considered alienating and unhelpful on it. It's a very reductive view of feminist activism. It's a very reductive view of queer activism. It's a very reductive view of migrant activism. To say that by recognising our differences and by saying that we are more oppressed in these ways than in some other ways, and that our oppressions intersect. The term intersectionality, which is one that we would use rather than identity politics for the most part, was one coined by a black woman legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, in the States in 1989. She was talking about how if you're a black woman, those intersections, those oppressions, intersect in ways that they wouldn't if you were a white woman or a black man. You are experiencing further the weight of the prejudices of both racism and misogyny in ways a white woman won't, because she won't experience racism, and a black man won't because he won't experience misogyny.
So to clarify, just for listeners, intersectionality means sort of the double hit on that. Exactly,
or in some cases a triple hit. You can be a queer black woman, you can be a queer working class woman. And I guess for a lot of women who are involved, it felt like an erasure of their working class identity, which we've seen actually further in the response from some men and some activists on the left to the Cop on Comrades piece, which is to claim that it's written by upper middle class feminists who are all in literary jobs or whatever, or all in universities, which is very definitely not the case. I don't think any of us are upper middle class. I don't even know what upper middle class would look like these days. That's not us in it. At any case, and many of the signatories are working class women, are working class activists, are queer women, are queer activists. So we said there are trans women who are involved in the drafting and who are involved in the signing.
To be clear, just because some people might not understand, by trans women you mean male to female transsexuals?
Yeah, that's kind of quite outdated terminology. It's people who are identified at birth as male, but don't feel that they identify with that and are in fact women, and made that identification on their state documentation in a lot of cases later in life.
I want to get into the meat of the article a little bit, because I think it's a very important debate, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just conscious that obviously you talk about people who are involved in feminist activism and left-wing activism in general. Not all of the listeners might be, and certainly not even I, might be clued in all of the vocabulary. So just to make sure that people listening understand, there's two words that I think are used in ways that might not be fully understood. One of them is silencing, and another is erasure. Can you maybe just very briefly tell me what you mean by each of those words?
So again, it wouldn't really be me meaning it. It's kind of the communal use that we made of them, and a more general understanding of that on the left.
Sure, but the average guy at Barstool might not understand it. So we'll address that.
Actually, it was an issue my mother took with the piece as well. She said she didn't understand the context of it. So yeah, I'll happily explain. So silencing is about a kind of criticism, that a universal criticism, frequently a criticism that's universally levelled at a particular movement, at a particular kind of people, based on one or several interactions with those kind of people. So, for example, the Irish Times piece, which we're talking about, took an example interaction on Twitter and used it to levy criticism at all feminist activism, and all activism and political engagement that would argue that there should be recognition of our differences and the different ways that we are oppressed. Because if we don't recognise that, then how can we fight against it properly? How can we address it properly? And how can we ensure that those oppressions aren't replicated in our own movement?
Okay, that's silencing. And erasure?
Erasure is to talk about, so to take an example, again, a relevant one from this article, to talk about the working classes that were exclusively composed of straight white men. That's not the exclusive composure of the working class. There are black queer women in the working class, there are traveller women in the working class, there are queer women in the working class, white queer women in the working class, and to insist that the working class is a homogenous identity who is the imagined white man living in Ballyfermot is not a helpful way to engage with those of the working class who are not.
Okay, I want to park those there because I want to look at the actual issues. I don't want to say the genesis, but the trigger for at least some of this was the trigger for at least this particular instance was Dean Scurry naming his podcast Pow Wow with Dean. For people who don't know him, he's the founder of Home Sweet Home. And that attracted some pretty sharp criticism on Twitter.
I'm not sure that.
Let me finish the point. The heft, as I understand it, the point of the criticism was that the word powwow is in some way owned by Native Americans, American Indians, and shouldn't be used by, for example, Irish white men. That seems a little bit petty, doesn't it?
So to clarify, that's not really what kicked off our engagement.
I'm aware of that. But just to address the point that Dean's,
I don't think the original tweet about which the article was based on was in fact a sharp criticism. I think it was meant as a gentle heads up that there are some members, a lot of members of the First Nations tribes and community in America, in the States in particular, who would ask that their terminology not be used outside their context without reference to their particular struggles, oppressions, and highlighting what's going on for them, which is the continued things like continued existence in communities without access to sufficient medical care, the femicide of First Nations women in Canada, for example.
Yeah, but Sinead, almost every word we speak comes from other languages, and very frequently comes from military adventures that somebody was on the sharp end of, and that's how words come into the English language. And I just looked up 3 very quick examples. Chocolate came to English through Spanish. It's straight up a Native American word. The word glitch in English, as in problem, comes from Yiddish. You could hardly find a more victimized culture than the Jewish people in Europe. And the word bungalow comes from Bengali. It actually has the same root as the name of the country Bangladesh, where it comes from. Is there somebody setting a rule as to which of these words can be used without thought?
So I don't think there is somebody setting the rule, but if I were asked by a member of those cultures not to use that word or to be more aware of the context, I certainly would be, which is the case with the term powwow and First Nations cultures. And
I haven't seen a source for that. Are you aware that somebody has made that request?
I am aware of several First Nations activists in the US making those requests, yes. But again, that wasn't a part of the conversation I was particularly involved in, and I don't want to get diverted too much into a discussion on cultural appropriation.
Absolutely, and I don't either. But I want to finish with this point, but on a simple point of principle. An individual, or even a collection of individuals, don't really have a right to do that, and it's questionable even whether a majority of those people, and I don't think anybody has said that there is a majority of American Indians who have expressed that, but to flip the tables, if a majority of Irish people said, and I won't ask you to answer the question, but if a majority of Irish people said we don't want New Yorkers celebrating St. Patrick's Day, I wonder what people in New York would say, and I doubt if Irish people would say that in any case. But let's go directly to your point. You said that and it's true, it's almost the first line in your in the Cop on Comrades piece that you and so many other people signed. It refers to Frankie Gaffney's article, and it said, last week a good number of left-wing men we work and organise with seriously disappointed us. These men, our friends, our fellow trade unionists, activists, writers, organisers and artists, shared and commented on a reductive and damaging article written by Frankie Gaffney. Are you really disappointed by somebody sharing an article?
We were disappointed by the ways in which the article was shared, certainly.
But, I mean, millions of people share hundreds of millions of articles. It doesn't mean that they necessarily agree with every word in them.
As we said, we were disappointed by the way in which people shared in which the men we work with, some of the men we work with, shared the article and the commentary that they shared on it. We certainly weren't disappointed by people commenting negatively on it or taking issue with some of the points in it.
Okay, I understand that. So clearly, some people may have shared it with the content of with a negative content, or not promoting it. But there is a criticism of feminism abroad that I'm sure you're aware of, that it has a tendency to be intolerant and not open to discussion. Do you think you're falling into that trap?
No, I don't. I think that this is part of a discussion that needs to be had, and I don't really, I wouldn't understand why a response to a situation that we see and an opening up of a conversation would be something that would be stifling discussion.
Okay. Can you see that maybe from somebody of Frankie Gaffney's point of view, that, as you say now, hundreds of feminists criticising not just Frankie Gaffney's article, but even people who just shared it or commented on it less than negatively, he might see that as a closing down of conversation?
I would find it difficult to understand how he would see, or how anyone would see, women coming together to write a response piece to be a closing down a conversation. I would consider it to be something that would be worth engaging with.
Is the piece that you wrote a response piece? I'm saying in the plural here. I understand you didn't draft it.
So, as I said, it's a response piece to nearly to the reaction that the article got, as I think we say quite clearly in the piece that we wrote.
What I want to do is I just want to go to one paragraph in what you wrote, and it says the article, you're referring again to Frankie Gaffney's article, and probably, I think, reasonably explaining why you object to it. It's reasonable to explain that. And what is written is, the article expressed the view that identity politics is good for nothing except dividing movements using language and narratives that have been made popular by men's rights activist groups and the alt-right. According to such narratives, straight white men are the new most oppressed group. This ignores the struggles of women and others at the sharp end of misogyny, racism, anti-trans and anti-queer violence. It aims to silence those who will no longer tolerate the violence, abuse and marginalisation we have suffered for so long. These alt-right arguments have been used by people on the left to support the view that women and feminists in particular are to blame for the rise of the far right. That's a string of causation, and I see that I don't see that there's strong links in all those cases. So Frankie Gaffney used language that has been made popular by the MRA. And are you saying then that it is the MRA, this men's rights activists and the alt-right? Are you saying that, are you those further things, are you accusing the alt-right of that, or are you accusing Frankie of that?
I'm not sure what you mean by accusing, and what things are we talking about exactly here?
The thing that is being accused is this ignores the struggles of women and others at the sharp end of misogyny.
Yeah, so as I said in the first instance, we took issue with the article and the response to it, and the reaction to it that men particularly felt that it captured. That feminism was ignoring the struggles of the straight white working class man, and that certainly is a narrative of the men's rights activist movement.
I might say the sky is blue. A neo-Nazi might agree. That doesn't really, in any valid way, associate me with a neo-Nazi, does it?
So if it were an argument exclusive to neo-Nazis or an argument exclusively propagated by neo-Nazis, then it might. But since it's such a universal example, I can't imagine that it would. But that is not the case with what we're talking about.
Oh, okay, that's a fair point that you make. And I think, as I understand you're saying, if I said the Holocaust didn't happen and neo-Nazis also said the Holocaust didn't happen, it would be valid of somebody to associate me with neo-Nazis, even if I didn't speak directly on neo-Nazis. But Frankie Gaffney has made criticisms that I think a lot of people think are valid and that really have nothing got to do with the alt-right movement, the alt-right being this kind of younger Trump-supporting American ideology for people who don't know.
It would be nice if he told the alt-right that it was nothing to do with them, so because we've been inundated, people who signed the letter and Feminist IRA in particular have been inundated with men who are involved in the alt-right and who are interested in claiming the ideals in the article and using them to criticise us with.
There's nothing at all. I mean, Frankie Gaffney is a novelist. He is unquestionably a left-wing activist who has supported, very many progressive causes. If I was him, I would think that was a very cheap shot, that you, without giving any examples, say that the language he's using reminds you of language of the alt-right and therefore in some way associates him with them.
If you are going to focus on a particular paragraph decide that it's not relevant to anything that you wrote, rather than interrogating what you wrote and interrogating why we and 479 of us had that response to us, are seeing the abuse and hassle that we are getting on Twitter and in other forums for speaking out in this way, and are deciding that that's what you're going to engage with rather than the wider conversation, then was probably a fruitless attempt to engage in the first place.
Well, I'm specifically asking what you mean, and I think it's valid to say that, if you're saying that there are examples where he's using language, the same language, or using language in the same way as the alt-right, do you, are there any particular examples that you have in mind?
I felt that we gave, and I felt that I have covered particular examples. So the point of using one particular interaction with one feminist on Twitter to decide that all feminist and all intersectionality arguments are ridiculous, to expand that into a claim that the working class, by which is clearly meant men in the working class, are the ones most ignored, is precisely a narrative and behaviour of the alt-right.
One other thing that kind of jumped out at me in the language is that there is a mention, and I asked you kind of what you meant by it, because I'm genuinely not entirely sure about things like erasure. And the sentence is there. It says, "This ignores the struggles of women and others at the sharp end of misogyny." Is Frankie not entitled to write something on a particular topic that just happens not to cover that? For example, the struggles of women?
He absolutely is. We don't mandate that everyone writes everything to cover the struggles of women, but to say that as a result in this piece that feminism, and to describe it as identity politics and suggest that we are in some way funded by the CIA is...
No, he didn't suggest that at all.
So I think in the piece that you read initially,
yes,
I think there was a very strong suggestion that intersectionality and its theories and propagation are in some way responsible for and to the benefit of the CIA.
No, that's not in the article. I've got Frankie's article up on the screen in front of me. It's clearly an ironic reference, and he says, and I'll give you the exact text, "If the CIA or MI5 wanted to encourage a style of activism that could consume an infinite amount of energy, yet was utterly ineffective at achieving anything other than dividing people, it would be this." So he's saying...
If you think that's an ironic reference, that's fair enough. I read it as a suggestion that there are ways in which we are doing the work of those who wish to divide the left and see us working against each other.
He is saying that, yeah, you're correct. But the notion that he suggested anyone was funded by the CIA or MI5, that's different. But I think you're correct. He is saying that he is... I mean, clearly the reference to the CIA is ironic, but he's saying that what are essentially very, very minor ideological battles within the left consume energy and achieve nothing. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, I think that if you are a man standing on the left, then you probably think that they're minor ideological battles. I think that where I'm coming from, as a woman who's heavily involved in abortion rights and maternity rights activism, they are absolutely categorically not minor issues. These are issues of literally life and death.
Sure, but he's not suggesting those. He used the precise example of a Twitter dispute over the name of a podcast.
So as I said, he used the precise example of a Twitter dispute and extended it into criticisms of all of intersectional feminism and what he calls identity politics.
But that's a reasonable writing tactic, isn't it? To say, okay, here's an example, narratively describe something and to give an example of it.
You might think it's a reasonable writing tactic, but by doing that and by extending it into all of feminism, it ignores all the other feminist activism work that we do.
That's quite possible, and I don't think he would deny that. But is he obliged to not ignore everything in every article he writes? You know, I bought a new refrigerator a couple of weeks ago. The instruction manual completely ignored feminism and the struggles of women. I didn't particularly object to that because it's not intended to cover that.
Did you use it to dismiss all the work of feminism?
No, I didn't, and I don't think either did Frankie Gaffney.
That was our reading of it, and that was the reading of 478 other feminist activists.
Sure, and that's a hell of a number, and clearly it has engaged a lot of people, and that's why I want to tease out the issue. One other issue in the a sentence, in fact, it occurs twice in the article. You start out by saying, we're a group of activist women from a wide variety of backgrounds, races, ethnicities and sexual orientations. And then later in the article you say, we are working class women, women of colour, migrant women, trans women, traveller women, disabled women, queer women, women who are sex workers, women with children and women who are none of these. Is that really relevant?
It certainly is to us. Our identities are absolutely relevant to this. Our oppressions are absolutely relevant to this. It's a key part of this discussion and this debate.
If some toff from Eton, let's say Boris Johnson, made exactly the same argument, would it be any less true?
Made the argument that we made. I think if Boris Johnson made our argument, I would fall over in shock.
Yeah, so would I, to be honest. You take my point. Anything that you say which is true regardless of who you are. It seems like there's a very big emphasis being put on an appeal to authority there.
I completely would disagree that an appeal to authority would be one that would list working class sex workers, trans women and...
No, that fits exactly the definition of appeal to authority. It's saying that we can believe what we say because of who we are.
I strongly disagree with that characterisation. I think it recognises our lived experiences and describes them.
That's fair enough. I'm not disputing that, but it seems like there's an emphasis in the article. One other thing you say in the article is, I'll read it exactly. It says, working class straight white men in Ireland don't have it easy these days. They never did. They're ignored by a political class that couldn't care less about them. They should have a say in the decisions that affect their lives, but often they don't. However, that doesn't make them immune to critique. And I think you're 100% right. However, it seems to me that you object to both Frankie Gaffney's critique and to the people who shared it.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, you say that white working class men, which I guess in this case is being represented by Frankie Gaffney, are not immune to critique, are feminists.
Of course not.
But what he did was make a critique, and you seem to be protesting not only against his critique, but also against...
We are protesting against his dismissal of feminism, his erasure of the struggles of women and others on the left who are at the rough end of patriarchy, as he says.
Okay, hold on for a second. You're saying you're protesting against his erasure of women on the left, and I can't find anything in his original article that does that. And the only connection that seems to be made to it in your piece, the Cop on Comrades piece, is that you say he has used language which is also used by men's rights activists and the alt-right.
So I think if you read the original piece, and again, I think we're getting too much into the original piece, and this isn't really what this was about. It was about the response of many who we consider to be our comrades to it. Mm-hmm. But if you read the original piece, and if you read the statement that identity politics is good for nothing but dividing us, mm-hmm. in the context of an article that takes one example of one interaction with a feminist on Twitter and uses it to disregard all activism that's based on your gender, your sexuality, your race or whatever, then mm-hmm. I think I completely disagree with your reading.
Okay. I take your point on that. Do you think that clearly he didn't feel the need to give more than one example? Do you think if he had tried to, he would have been able to find more examples?
I don't know. I also don't think that it's particularly useful to start off if it's an attempt to have a conversation with, for example, someone has a particular issue with what they perceive as identity politics. I don't think that the pages of the Irish Times is a good place to start off your conversation with those you consider to be your comrades on it.
Oh, why is that?
How is that a conversation other than an open criticism?
Sure, I think in fairness he could at least claim to have gotten a reaction, but I won't pursue that point anymore. A different thing, and clearly you're aiming at, your piece, the Cop on Comrades piece, was aimed at, might be the wrong word, but addressed to men on the left.
Yeah.
If you were a man on the left, and you genuinely felt that you wanted to make an argument in order to improve the left-wing movement, that you wanted to make an argument that was critical of the way things were done, particularly by feminists.
I would want to know first what you had done for women's rights, what your position on various women's rights positions are, what your engagement with the history of women's rights in Ireland, where you stand on the provision of abortion to women in Ireland, what you do about that. And then I would consider listening to your criticism of feminist activism. Up until that point, I would not be interested.
Okay, that's answered my question even before, well, it answered my second question before I got to it. But to presuming that somebody ticked all of those boxes for you, do you think that this would make them hesitate before they raised an issue?
I think it would make them hesitate before they raised an issue in the pages of a national newspaper before coming to us with us, certainly.
There is, I think, growing within feminism, and possibly Julie Bindel is a good example of a long-standing feminist. I don't know how old she is now, but she's relatively elderly. She would have been very active in the 60s and 70s. She would be termed a second-wave feminist, and I think it's fair to say the point of view that you have put forward would be more associated with third-wave feminists.
Yeah. Julie Bindel would be someone I strongly disagree on a variety of issues.
Okay. I know that she has been, for example, not on the same page as you, let's say, particularly over the issue of trans women. But to set that aside, how would you classify your differences with her?
That would be a primary one.
No, I don't want to go for precise examples. I'm more thinking kind of from a philosophical standpoint, from where you start.
Philosophical standpoint, there's actually an awful lot of differences between UK feminism and Irish feminism. There's a lot of UK feminism that is personified in Julie Bindel, that with the issues that they take with trans women. And if you look at Irish feminist activism, particularly of the last 10 to 15 years, we work hand in hand and arm in arm with our trans sisters. Our struggles are theirs, their struggles are ours. When I say ours, I mean cis women, as I'm cis rather than trans.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that there's a kind of ignoring of the issues that Irish women and even women in Northern Ireland face by British feminisms. Which
sure, but to focus specifically on the philosophical, the difference in start point between the second wave and third wave feminists.
So I've kind of tried to describe some there. I'm not really sure what.
You were saying Irish and UK feminists, and to be honest, I'm not sure what the difference, what that distinction is.
So I guess Irish feminism, particularly the Irish feminism I'm involved in, would subscribe more to third and fourth wave feminism,
mm-hmm.
Which would owe a great deal to intersectionality and black feminism and anarchist feminism of the kind of 1980s, 1970s onwards, whereas second wave feminism would have been very kind of white middle class feminism, or at least that would be how it's identified now, rather than a more inclusive feminism, which is kind of what we strive to be these days.
There's a criticism, it's not necessarily my criticism, but I think it's worth asking you to react to it, that clearly you've got a huge amount of support from a certain section of society, from feminists with this, and you say now well over 400 signatories for this particular article, and you've made it clear that you're reacting not so much to Frankie Gaffney's article as to the reception that it got mm-hmm. from men on the left. It strikes me that right now, as we're speaking, little girls in a lot of countries across the world are basically being forced down on the ground, have their clothes pulled off, their legs forced open, and have their clitoris sliced off with a rusty blade. And to me, that seems like a issue of such monumental importance that it puts these type of arguments really into the halfpenny place. How would you react to a criticism of priorities on that?
I'm not really interested in defending the idea that there's space for feminist activism in Ireland, even though there are women around the world who are more oppressed. I certainly think that there is space for feminist activism in Ireland within Irish circles for women who are living in Ireland, women and others who are living in Ireland who have need of feminist activism. I'm not really interested in leaving women in Ireland to go through with pregnancies that they can't bear to carry because there are women in other places who are more oppressed. I'm not interested in leaving women and girls in Ireland to try and end their pregnancies with bleach because there are women in other places who are more oppressed. I'm not interested in leaving women and girls in Ireland to the not very tender mercies of maternity services in which you have no right to refuse consent if a high court decides otherwise because there are women in other places who are more oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the relevance of that to our discussions. I mean, if you can argue that there are people in other places who are more oppressed to any other activism, and yet I never hear it levied against, for example, the Home Sweet Home movement, as rightly it should not have been. There are people in other countries who are more homeless and who have been in more dire straits than people living on the streets in Ireland. We still struggle for them. We still fight for them. No one suggests that because there are men who are homeless in other countries that we shouldn't find beds for homes for homeless men in Ireland.
I understand what you're saying, but you can see how that type of a criticism can, with a broader audience, be quite damaging to feminism.
No, I can't. I don't understand how you would suggest that it would be okay for us not to fight for women's rights in Ireland, for our rights to own our own bodies, because there are women in other countries who are more oppressed than women here. And I wouldn't particularly be interested in engaging with that kind of discussion and that kind of debate.
Okay. For one thing, I mean, clearly the one thing that's very centrally important for you is repeal of the Eighth Amendment and access to abortion in Ireland. That will require a referendum. That will require a 50% vote. And that will require that people who are obviously very active on that issue, such as yourself and many, many other feminists and other people of all sorts of stripe on the left, are active on that. And that's quite a reach. That's a big thing. It's a big ask to achieve that, given the state of public opinion in Ireland even today.
Well, I think if you look at the most recent public opinion polls, the vast majority are in favour of repeal. If you look at the outcome of the Citizens' Assembly, you see what happens when people engage with the issue and are engaged on the issue. It's a massive favour for repeal and broad liberalisation of abortion access.
That's true, although it seems that there is a large middle there that would tolerate some level of access to abortion that I suspect would be significantly less than a lot of the repeal the Eighth activists would like. But to put that aside,
I think that was argued before the Citizens' Assembly, but when you see the outcome of the Citizens' Assembly, that just doesn't hold up.
Nevertheless, it requires a vote. Nevertheless, it requires a vote, and that requires appealing to the broad mass of the population. Do you think that this type of an argument would be appealing to them? And if not, what argument? How would you phrase that to someone who has?
What type of argument is this?
Well, clearly there's been a very animated discussion about this online, but that's within a relative about this article of Frankie Gaffney's, the reaction to it, and the Cop on Comrades piece. That's. There's been an animated reaction to that online, but that occurs within a fairly narrow section of society. I'm wondering how you would convert the arguments you make within that narrow section out to a broader public.
Well, that wasn't all any of us were doing in the time that we were working on this. I wouldn't say there was even a single one of us who were involved in the drafting and signing on this who were not also involved in other forms of feminist and pro-choice activism. So, for example, I spoke to the Citizens' Assembly on behalf of Parents for Choice. While all of this was going on, I was also helping to organise coffee mornings around the country that Parents for Choice were doing. I was also involved in procuring the abortion pill for 3 women that week. As well as helping one woman get out of a particularly abusive situation into a safe place, and talking to. I also run various parenting support groups.
Sure. No, I understand that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you weren't doing something else. But you mentioned at the start your mum made a criticism of this, that she felt the language was exclusionary. Do you think that she's unique in that, or do you think that quite a lot of people will be like her?
I'll say to you what I said to her. It wasn't a piece that was written for her. It was a piece that was written in response and aimed at people who are already working with us, in our circles on this, who are specifically aware of what we're already talking about. We don't.
But isn't it more important to? I don't mean your mum specifically, but the type of person she represents. Isn't it more important to convince and bring on side people who just have no idea what erasure means?
We wouldn't write a response piece that was aimed to convince and bring on side people who have no idea what erasure means. We'd write a very different piece, and we'd do very different work. And that's why I was talking about the other things that I do, and the other writing and the other speaking work that I do. And I'm talking about myself as an example. I know that there are many, many others.
Yes, no, I'm aware of that as well. But my question, and I'll to play devil's advocate, if I was, I don't know who organises a campaign to retain the Eighth Amendment, I can see myself twirling my moustache in my lair with my whatever organisation of co-conspirators, and I'm saying to myself, how can we slime and smear these people as much as possible? And I would say, let's dig out this article and say that this is repeal the amendment is being pushed by crackpot feminists who think that men shouldn't be even allowed to use the word powwow in their podcast.
Honestly, they say that kind of thing anyway. I was in 2013. I was at the March to repeal the Eighth, the March for Choice in September, with my daughter in a sling on my back, and that has been she was on my front actually, in a sling on my front, and that has been used as a criticism of me ever since by particular components of the left. So like if that were to stop me doing anything, I'd never set foot outside the house. I'd never do any pro-choice activism. I'd certainly never go around having any kinds of opinions.
Okay. Just finally then, in that case, directly to Frankie Gaffney, how would you say, one sentence, how can he be a better activist on the left?
I'd suggest talking to women rather than at and over women.
Sinead Redmond, blogger with Feminist Ire, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 65 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 30th of June 2017. I have links to Frankie Gaffney's original article and to the Cop on Comrades piece, along with other references, in the show notes on the website. If you can think of another topic that should be covered in a future show, or if you want to suggest someone to include, and that could be yourself, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and give it a rating, or even write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, follow the podcast on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, Frankie Gaffney at Frankie Gaffney, and Sinead Redmond at Sinead Redmond, and follow the hashtag #CopOnComrades for more on this controversy. And of course, most importantly, subscribe to the podcast so new shows automatically come up in your podcast feed. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. And you can subscribe by email now as well, so you just get an automatic email each time a new podcast goes live. There's full information about that and contact details for the show all at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The assistant producer is Liam McLaughlin. Thank you for listening.